All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And as part of my never-ending quest to make life easier for students in the AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies class and the AWD 1111 Database-Driven Web Development classes, I've been creating my own series of video presentations based on the ebooks from Mr. Flavio Copes. And so far I have done about 5 videos, I think, for Mr. Copes' HTML ebook, a dozen videos for his CSS book, and 5 for his JavaScript book. And currently I've done, how many? Like 3 or 4 for the one I'm on now, which is his ES5 to ES Next book. I think I've done 3 so far. So that puts me right here, talking about modules. All right, so ES modules is the ECMAScript standard for working with modules. While Node.js has been using the common JS standard for years, the browser never had a module system. The standardization process was completed in 2015, and browsers started implementing this type, and it's the way that modules are now done. It says they're very cool because they let you encapsulate all sorts of functionality and expose this to JavaScript files and libraries. All right, so here is the syntax. You got to kind of look at it this way, that what these modules allow you to do is to create your own code, usually, and then bring it into your program or to any program you want to bring it into. The syntax to import a module is shown there. Now it says, while common JS uses it that way, so this is the way pretty much it's done in Node.js. A module is a JavaScript file that exports one or more values, objects, functions, or variables using the exports keyword. So you typically export it into from whatever you wrote using something like this, and then you import it into wherever you want to use it using something like that. And they show an example. It says this ends up behaving like a defer script load. Okay. It is important to note that any script loaded with type equal module like this is automatically loaded in strict mode. So you don't need the using strict in there. It's superfluous to put that in. In the example that's right here, what you're saying is I want to import this, and it's been defined in here, which means which means in my current folder where I am, but there's a file in that current folder called uppercase.js. So once it's been imported, you can then use it in whatever file you imported it into. You can also use the exact or absolute path, and you probably would do this more if this was a library module that was not yours but somebody else's. It says this is valid, this is not valid. Here you did not give it any kind of path. All right, not sure why that one wouldn't be. Probably again because you didn't start it with anything. So it must be either an absolute path like this. Whoops, try that again, Jeff. It must either be an absolute path like this one, or start with a slash or a dot slash or a dot dot slash. All right, other import export options. Says we saw this above. This creates one default export. In a file, however, you can export more than one thing using that kind of syntax. So rather than just exporting this, you can export multiple things. And another module can bring them all in at once by just using the asterisk. If you want, you can perform destructuring in here. So rather than putting in A, B, and C, we could add just A or just A and B as example. All right. It says if you want to see an example, you can go take a look. This is Flavio's own stuff out here. All right. Not sure exactly what this has. Okay. But feel free to take a look at that if you so desire. All right. The next thing mentioned in here is cores, not cores, cores. It says modules are fetched by using cores. This means that if you reference scripts from other domains, they must have a valid cores header that allows cross-site loading. So in other words, if you're going to grab something from somebody else, it must be permissible. Okay, it says, what about browsers that do not support modules? It says, use a combination of type equal module and no module. The no module will be for those that don't support it. So this is something that we will discuss in more depth and breadth of coverage in the AWD 1111 class. But as mentioned there, ES modules are one of the biggest features we've added to modern browsers. All right. We can now use them, but as it says, we must also remember that having more than a few modules is going to have a performance hit on pages. Webpack, as it says, is probably going to be a huge player, even if the modules land in the browser. All right, but again, they are being used in Node.js as well. All right, the next thing that's discussed in here are some of the new string methods. And it says there, any string value got some new instance methods, repeat and code point at. Repeat is kind of neat because as they mention in here, so if I want to repeat this 3 times, I can do this. Now that might not sound that great, but think about if you had something that had to be repeated 100 times. And if we wanted a space in there, because notice how ho runs together, we could just say ho space inside of the quotes. And it can be single quotes or double quotes, dot repeat. It returns an empty string if there's no parameter, so if there's nothing in there, or the parameter is 0. If it's negative, you get a range error. There's also code point at. And as it says here, this method is used to handle Unicode characters that cannot be represented by a single 16-bit Unicode unit, but rather need 2 characters instead. Using char code at, you need to retrieve the first and the second and combine them. Using code point at, you get everything in just one call. Okay. If you want more on that, Copes has got a Unicode guide as well. All right. Let the clock stop here. All right, next is new object methods, and I just want to show you this because we go through this with a couple pages, and then they go into the spread operator, and I think that's going to be a good place to stop here, even though I'm stopping early because spread is an unbelievably important operator, so I'd like to have it start its own video. So let's finish up this section in here on some of the new object methods. And as it says here, ES6 introduced several static methods under the object namespace. Object.is to determine if 2 values are the same value. Object.assign, which is used to provide what's called a shallow copy. And Object.set prototype of, to set a prototype. Object.is or is, as it says, this method aims to help compare values. All right. And it says Object.is AB. It says this will always return false unless one of these conditions is correct. Either they're the same exact object, or they're equal strings, or they're equal numbers, or they're both undefined, or they're both null, or they're both NaN, not a number, or they're both true, or they're both false. It says here 0 and -0 are different values in JavaScript, so pay close attention. Second, we have Object.assign. And as mentioned right here, introduced in ES 2015, Object.assign copies all the enumerable own properties of one or more objects into another object. Its primary use is to create a shallow copy of an object. As it says on the bottom of the page here, being a shallow copy, the values are cloned and the references are copied, not the objects themselves. So in other words, it's a pointer to the object as opposed to copies of the object's values itself. So if you edit an object property in the original object, it's also modified in the copied object since they're pointing to the same thing. All right. Next, they have Object.set prototype of. It says sets the prototype of an object. Remember, with a prototype, what you are able to do is to take what's in an existing class, basically, and extend it, make it do things it wasn't designed necessarily to do. All right, so like I said, next we've got the spread operator and sets and maps and then generators. And I think that'll probably take up most of the next lesson. So I'm going to stop right here and pick it up again in just a couple minutes talking about the spread operator.